The sterile scent of antiseptic clung to the air in Ward C, a constant reminder of sickness and fragility. Eleanor, a night nurse at St. Jude's Hospital, adjusted her glasses, the fluorescent lights reflecting off the polished linoleum floor. It was 1 a.m. and the hospital was a labyrinth of hushed whispers and beeping machines. Tonight, however, the whispers felt different. They were not the hushed tones of worried families or tired staff, but something else entirely. A faint, almost imperceptible murmuring that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. She was on her rounds, checking on the few remaining patients in Ward C. Most were elderly, sedated, and thankfully asleep. She preferred the quiet of the night shift, but lately a creeping unease had settled over her. It had started a week ago, after the death of Mrs. Albright, an old woman who had been a long-term resident. Mrs. Albright had been lucid, if frail, and had often spoken of the shadows that watch. Eleanor had dismissed it as senility. Now she wasn't so sure. As she passed room 312, Mrs. Albright's old room, she heard it, a soft, rhythmic tapping, like fingernails against glass. She paused, listening. It stopped. She shook her head, attributing it to the old building settling. But then she heard a faint, almost inaudible sigh coming from inside the empty room. Her heart gave a lurch. The room was supposed to be empty, cleaned, and ready for a new patient. She knew for a fact it had been vacant since Mrs. Albright passed. Hesitantly, she pushed the door open. The room was dark, the blinds drawn. She swept her flashlight across the pristine white walls, the empty bed. Nothing. But the air was noticeably colder in here, and that faint metallic scent she'd smelled in Mrs. Albright's last days seemed stronger. She backed out of the room, her skin prickling. She continued her rounds, but her senses were on high alert. When she reached the nurse's station, she noticed something odd. The patient call light for room 312 was lit up on the main panel. Eleanor stared at it, bewildered. How could an empty room's call light be activated? She pressed the reset button. The light went out. A moment later, it lit up again. Eleanor's breath hitched. This wasn't a malfunction. This was something else. She decided to ignore it, telling herself it was just a faulty wire. But as she turned away, she heard a faint, almost imperceptible whisper right beside her ear. "She's waiting." Eleanor spun around, her eyes wide with terror. There was no one there, just the empty corridor, the silent machines. She practically ran through the rest of her rounds, her mind screaming at her to get out. She needed to finish her shift, and then she was going home. As she hurried back towards the nurse's station, she heard it again. The tapping. This time it was coming from the supply closet, just down the hall from room 312. The supply closet was always kept locked. Eleanor knew this for a fact. She had the only key. She approached the closet, her flashlight beam trembling. The tapping grew louder, more insistent. It sounded like someone was trapped inside, desperately trying to get out. "Hello?" Eleanor called out, her voice barely a whisper. "Is anyone in there?" The tapping stopped abruptly. A moment of profound silence. Then a low, guttural moan echoed from inside the closet, a sound of immense pain and despair. It was the sound she had heard Mrs. Albright make in her final moments. Eleanor stumbled backward, dropping her flashlight. It clattered to the floor, its beam pointing erratically at the ceiling. She scrambled away from the closet, her heart hammering against her ribs. She had to get out. As she turned to flee, she saw it. A shadowy figure, indistinct and wavering, standing in the doorway of room 312. It was tall, impossibly thin, and seemed to flicker at the edges, like heat haze. It wasn't quite human, and its eyes, 2 points of dull, glowing white, like bone. It took a step forward, its movement jerky and unnatural. Eleanor let out a strangled cry and bolted. She ran blindly through the hospital corridor, past the silent patient rooms, her mind screaming at her to escape. She burst into the main lobby, gasping for breath, and didn't stop running until she reached the emergency exit. She slammed the door open, practically falling out into the cool night air. She didn't look back. She just ran, her lungs burning, until she reached her car. She sped home, the image of the creature burned into her retinas. She didn't sleep that night, or the next. She called in sick, then quit her job, never offering an explanation. She knew no one would believe her anyway. Months passed. Eleanor tried to forget, to move on. She got a new job, a day shift, in a quiet doctor's office. She avoided hospitals, especially after dark, but the nightmares persisted. The pale figure, the glowing white eyes, the metallic scent. One evening, she was watching TV at home. It was late, and she was alone. She felt a chill despite the warmth of her apartment. She pulled a blanket tighter around herself. Then she heard it. Faintly at first, then growing louder. A soft, rhythmic tapping. Her blood ran cold. She froze, her eyes darting around the room. There was nothing there, just her quiet apartment. But then the tapping grew louder, closer. It sounded like it was coming from inside her television. She stared at the screen, bewildered. The tapping was now accompanied by a faint, almost inaudible sigh. Suddenly, the screen flickered, then went black. Eleanor gasped, dropping the remote. Then a faint metallic scent filled the room. The air grew noticeably colder. She heard a whisper, right beside her ear. "You left the light on, Eleanor!" Eleanor screamed, scrambling backward, knocking over a lamp. She looked frantically around the room. Nothing. But then, the screen of the television flickered back to life. It was static at first, then it cleared. And there it was, standing in the center of the screen, facing her. The figure, taller, more distinct than she remembered. Its pale, translucent skin seemed to glow with an internal light. Its mouth was a wide black chasm, devoid of teeth. And those eyes, they burned with a malevolent, hungry light. It took a step forward within the confines of the screen, its long, spindly arm reaching out. Eleanor stumbled backward, tripping over the fallen lamp. She scrambled to her hands and knees, her mind screaming at her to move, to run. She crawled towards the front door, her fingers scrabbling at the lock. The figure was moving slowly, deliberately, its footsteps making that same soft, rhythmic tapping sound. She could hear it breathing now, a ragged, wheezing sound, like air escaping a punctured lung. She finally got the door unlocked, pulling it open with a desperate heave. She burst out into the hallway, gasping. She didn't look back. She ran. She ran until her lungs burned and her legs ached, not stopping until she reached the street, desperately looking for help. Her apartment was found empty the next morning, the front door ajar, the television still on, displaying a screen full of static. The police searched, but found no trace of her. The case went cold, just another missing person in the city's vast records. But sometimes, late at night, when the wind howls just right around St. Jude's Hospital, the remaining night nurses swear they can hear a faint rhythmic tapping coming from the empty room 312. And sometimes, if they're unlucky, they see a faint, sickly white glow emanating from the room and hear a whisper carried on the wind. "She's waiting."